think HR is one of the foundational departments, if you will, within any organization. I mean, we're oftentimes the first connection that people have, and all the way through, the last connection they have if you think of the employee life cycle. There is a different group typically within the older generations where they're like, I just want to come to work and do my job, and I don't need to know everything, and I don't need you to give me a cookie just for showing up to work. And so there can be a little bit of a battle of what people want. And like the older generations will be like, well, these younger generations are just entitled. And, the younger generations are thinking like, why don't you care more? It's difficult. But I think for me, providing psychological safety and creating a really positive work culture starts with transparency. So if you think about the communications team, like you said, marketing, and if they have a 5-year strategy, if they want to roll out these specific things, you can sit down with them as HR and be like, okay, how can we help you? What kind of staffing do you need? What kind of training do you need? What types of consultants might we need to bring in? All of those different types of questions so that they understand how important what you're doing is for them. And by learning the business, understanding the budget, understanding if you're a nonprofit, understanding what the board is driving, you can play the game. You can shift the language in every conversation that you're having, every presentation that you give.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the HR Heroes podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have Mickey Gates with me here today. Mickey, thank you so much for coming to the show. I'm excited for you to be here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here also.
So because this is the HR Heroes podcast, and we're really talking about the human element of the human experience in business, I like to ask a human-centric question to get started with us here today. So Mickey, Great. How's your heart doing today?
My heart is good, actually. It's really good. Even though there are things every day that break my heart a little bit, overall, I see the good work that we do and the good in the world. And so I tend to be somebody that sees all the positivity and happiness, and I focus on that. So my heart is good. How's your heart?
My heart's doing good. I also have been having this conversation with a lot of leaders recently. I've been messing around with this framework that I try and approach life through. It's called practical optimism. Have you ever heard the saying that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you choose to react to it? Absolutely. I feel like with all the negativity in the world that's kind of surrounding us, it's so important to have that authority to choose how we look at the world. So how did you kind of choose to develop that optimistic mindset for everything that's kind of happening around us these days?
Ooh, I have a good answer for that one. So the reason I laughed when you asked how my heart is doing is that I actually have a unique medical history in that I was born with cancer. I was born with ovarian cancer and went through treatment when I was a child. And so that helped me recognize that most things really are not that big of a deal compared to real life or death issues. And then 8 years ago, I had a stroke while I was at work. I was talking to an employee, just like we're talking, and I was rushed to the hospital and had dozens of tests. And ultimately, they found a tumor inside my heart, and I had to have emergency open heart surgery. And then 4 days later, I had a pacemaker implanted. And while that's a very big story to tell you, like that's how I got to not sweating the small stuff, I think I can help other people see the same thing. Like we've all had actual emergencies in our life. We've all seen and witnessed, whether it's, within our own homes or our own backyards or around the world, we've seen things that really are life or death and things that we should be worried about. And if you step back and you look at it from that perspective, from that big picture perspective, it's much easier to be like, you know what, this really isn't that big of a deal. And I'm going to really enjoy the things that make life great. One of the things that I recommend to my employees and people that I work with is if you're not going to remember this in 6 months, something bad, right? If you don't think you're going to remember what this is in 6 months, why are you giving it energy today? Learn what you can from it and move on. Focus on all the good. So yeah, that's how.
I mean, I feel like that's so beautiful. I feel like, today there's never been a better time to be alive. Right? Mm-hmm. With all the technology we have surrounding us, with the ability to order food and have it show up at your door, to order anything on Amazon comes next day. we live in such an amazing time in society, but it seems like our lizard brain, if you will, is so easy to focus on all the negative stuff. And when
Mhm.
you really kind of zoom out on the perspective of how lucky we were to wake up in a warm bed, to be able to turn a
Mhm.
faucet and have water that runs through, it's just so easy to be appreciative for the amazing things that we have in our life. But often it seems like social media, as an example, or the media in general, often is really good at tapping into the scary stuff to gain our attention. One of my
Absolutely.
really good friends, Dante, said to me, he said, Keenan, marketers ruin everything. And he said that because once they see an opportunity, they often lean into it super hard. And it seems like over the
Mhm.
last couple of years, it seems like the world has been optimized for the negative because our brain
Mhm.
picks up on it and it releases those feelings of stress. But I
Exactly,
often
in
worry
fear.
about the mental health of our communities. Yeah, and
Mhm.
fear. I worry
Yep.
about the mental health of our communities when we're surrounded by this negativity consistently. It's just such an interesting time to kind of be alive and to be an optimist like you and I are.
Yes, yeah. I agree completely. I think you're right. I think, you hear about people doom scrolling and, watching the news and getting sucked into all the negative. And I do think there's a place for that, and not necessarily doom scrolling, but making sure that you are aware of current events and that you are, for people like us that do have a lot of privilege, being able to use that privilege for good. There is a place for that. But I think it's more of a yes and, like, yes, I'm going to pay attention to this and I'm going to use my privilege and my ability to support others. And I'm going to see what's great in the world. And I'm going to allow myself to have fun and be silly and enjoy the good things in life.
One of the things that I love to be able to do is tie our episodes together. So, our previous guest wanted to ask you a question.
Great.
She said, with the practice of HR, we do a lot of caring for others. So, Mickey, how do you recognize that you need to care for yourself? And do you give yourself enough space to be able to take those breaks when you're kind of feeling like you might be pouring from an empty cup?
Great question. And something that I think is really necessary for any leader, HR leaders in particular, because our jobs can be very lonely. We get a lot of information about our employees' health or about, situations that are happening that we can't talk to anybody about. And so it feels very lonely and very isolated. And I think a lot of the burden can be put on our shoulders too. We can be blamed for a lot of things where we're just following the law or following policy and procedure. And so I definitely feel what she's saying. I think I'm pretty good at that. I think my medical history has made me a little bit more aware of my health and how I'm feeling than maybe other people. So that I think has given me a little bit of an advantage. But I've always been somebody that's been focused on balance. And that doesn't mean, like, I don't necessarily love the term work life balance because I don't think that every day it is a balance, but it's more like a harmony or an integration. And so I do pay attention to if I have a really intense week, whether that's intense in the number of hours that I'm working or just what I'm working on, that I make sure to schedule myself some time to get up and take a walk. I schedule time to spend with my family. And I will put into my calendar focus time or I will block time. So if I know that I'm just feeling the pressure, I will schedule that in. And I am luckily in the level of role where I'm able to do that. And so to answer her question, where I am now in my career, I can take those steps myself. I try to help my employees do the same thing. Maybe people that are a little bit more entry level that feel that sense of responsibility to let them know, like, I expect you to log off when you're on vacation. When you're on PTO, I expect you to not log in. Um, but yeah, I think it's being very intentional, and I think it's scheduling just like we do for everything else. I schedule meetings with, to go to the dentist. I schedule meetings with my CEO. I schedule all those. I need to schedule intentional time to take care of myself as well.
I love that topic, work life integration,
Yeah.
because, one of the things that I picked up about you is you're incredibly passionate about the work that you do. And I think about when we love what we do, it's very easy for us to think about work as being all consuming because we have a
Mm.
mission. We're trying to impact our communities. As an example, with you guys, you're trying to eliminate poverty. What
Yeah.
an amazing mission to be a part of. So, why do you think so many people have the Sunday scaries as an example? I see this a lot on social media today where people say, I don't want to go to work on Monday. And my heart
Mhm.
aches for these people because often it seems like they don't love what they do. So,
Mhm.
why do you think you kind of focus on that work life integration? Because work is such a gigantic part of our lives that it seems like it should be integrated into our life experience as well.
Yeah, I think that I have a couple of different paths to answer that. I think for a lot of people, maybe they haven't found the perfect job for them, and they're working in an environment where they're not passionate about the work that they're doing, and so it's just to pay the bills, or they know what they want to do, but maybe they haven't found an organization or a company that's the best fit for them. There's just not a match, and I think coming to terms with knowing, like saying like that's okay. I can accept that maybe this is just a bridge position that I'm in right now, to help me get to the type of organization or the type of position where I want to be. And I think, people ask me a lot, like, how did you get into HR? And my path was like a pinball machine, like it wasn't like I got out of college and was like, yeah, I'm going to be in HR for an international NGO. Not at all. I started in nonprofit and then went to retail and then had some bridge positions along the way. But what I knew as I was kind of figuring out my path was that I wanted to work with people and I wanted to make an impact. And so I've been very intentional, um, as I've gotten older in my career and kind of grown in my career. I've been intentional with researching the types of organizations that I want to work for and figuring out how to get there. And so I think maybe that's a little bit different than other people do it, where they look at like, this is the position I want. I backed up and was like, no, where do I want to work? Okay, how do I get there? What kind of position would fit in best? Does that answer your question?
A beautiful example of reverse engineering happiness, which I feel like
Yeah.
is such a healthy exercise of being able to say, where do I want to end up? And then how do I work backwards to get there? Which I feel like is so
Hmm.
powerful.
Yeah.
One of the really cool things that you said in our previous conversation was that you have always pushed to eliminate, I would say, the stigma of HR. And everywhere
Hmm.
you've gone, you've tried to push for the title of people and culture. So let's talk about why you see that emphasis of changing the perception of HR into people and culture and why that's so important.
Yeah, I think HR is one of the foundational departments, if you will, within any organization. I mean, we're oftentimes the first connection that people have, and all the way through, the last connection they have. If you think of the employee life cycle, we build policy and procedure. We're the ones that are working with the senior leaders to create the culture. And we most often work with DEI initiatives and inclusion initiatives and make sure that the people that are working for us can complete whatever the mission and the vision is. And in the past, and still in many organizations, people think of HR is either the place you go to get in trouble. They're afraid when they get an email from HR, or it's just the place that handles benefits and is more transactional, when really there's such a bigger part of that. And so shifting, even just that little bit of shifting the name to help people understand that our first job is to take care of our people. So when we talk about all of the other employees in an organization and they talk about their clients, they're talking about external clients. But for HR, our clients are our people. So for me, every single conversation that we have, yes, it's about getting to that end result of ending poverty. But how do we do it so that our employees are getting what they need, so they have the resources that they need to do their jobs well, so that they have a great experience? And through all of that, we're building our culture. So to me, it's just much better than human resources, which just feels very administrative and very transactional versus really relational.
It seems like today, especially in the work environment, people are looking to be a part of organizations that will take care of them. They want to be a part of a culture that is tied to a mission. They want to be a part of an organization that has the best interest looking out for them. And it seems like over the last couple of years, we've seen a dynamic shift in how workplace culture has kind of been put in a negative light. A good
Mm-hmm.
example, and I kind of want to riff on this topic of psychological safety. In the
Mm-hmm.
news, it seems like every other day we see the headlines of Google cutting 12,000 jobs, Amazon
Yeah.
13,000, Zoom 1,100. It's wild. And when I
Yeah.
think about kind of the idea of what workplace culture means today, it means psychological safety. And so, how do you
Mm-hmm.
kind of think about the ability to, I would say, nurture and cultivate that psychological safety for your organization compared to all the negative things that we see out in the world today, especially in the headlines?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think about, yes, workplace culture means psychological safety for certain generations. Because if you think, right now we have five generations working in the workforce. And so the baby boomers that are near the end of their, careers, and then we have some Gen Zs coming in, the Gen Zs, the millennials, and even some of the younger Gen Xers definitely want that place of psychological safety. They want to be taken care of. They want to make sure that their voices are heard. So it's like, yes, we want the care, but we also want you to see us and hear us and recognize us as individuals. And for a lot of them, that's what psychological safety is like, you see me, you understand me, you respect me. But there is a different group, typically within the older generations, where they're like, I just want to come to work and do my job, and I don't need to know everything, and I don't need you to give me a cookie just for showing up to work. And so there can be a little bit of a battle of what people want. And like the older generations will be like, well, these younger generations are just entitled, and the younger generations are thinking like, why don't you care more? And so it's delicate, it's difficult, but I think for me, providing psychological safety and creating a really positive work culture starts with transparency. That doesn't mean that you're telling everybody everything all at once, but transparency with senior leadership and transparency in talking about why we're doing what we're doing, how we're going to get there, how we're using the information that we get. And even just being aware that there's different generations, being aware of all the different types of diversity and considering them with every decision that we make.
Man, it seems like we have to get rid of our quick reflex to judge others. Because it seems like the older I get, maybe I'm just more aware of it, but it seems like it's so easy to say, millennials, Gen Z, you're so entitled, boomers,
Yeah,
you're on the way out. And it's like
yeah,
we've almost gotten so comfortable with this idea of judging each other. But judgment never leads to good decisions, and it never leads to good
no.
relationships. And it's just such an interesting time to kind of think about, why are we so quick to judge each other in today's world? What do you kind of think about that?
I think you're absolutely correct. And it makes me think actually about a colleague of mine. His name is Michael Ashford. He wrote a book called Can I Ask a Question? And the idea is exactly what you said, is like we are so quick to judge people and make assumptions based on what we've read or what we've experienced in the past or whatever it might be. And sometimes it's based on, gender stereotype or generational stereotype. And sometimes it's just because um, for various reasons that we don't even know about, like that unconscious bias where you're not even sure why you've made that judgment, but you're quick to assume. And it's so dangerous because it puts people in the other category, or like the them, they, them category, instead of slowing down and seeking to understand, asking more questions, trying to understand another person's perspective. And what I think, like, you talk about generation specifically, I think about like how much I want to learn from the older generations about their experience. They've been through so much, and um, can teach us so much. And then I think the same thing about younger generations. Like they can teach me so much when it comes to things that I don't even understand, rather than saying that they're entitled or tired or whatever it might look like yet. So I think for me and what we try to do at my organization and people that I work with is slow down, seek to understand, ask more questions. And like I said previously, consider everyone's perspectives when we're making decisions, not assume that we know how people are going to feel or how they're going to act.
I want to riff on the topic of resiliency for a second, because while you were speaking there, talking about what we can learn from the previous generations, I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and this individual had a little bit of judgment in his voice by saying Gen Z is one of the least resilient generations that's come up today. And one of the reasons why that a lot of people don't think about is we often don't have so much exposure to the older generations, the
Exactly.
boomers, the Gen X. And when we talk about spending time with these older generations, they share stories. They share
Mm-hmm.
stories about hardship. They tell stories about how they overcame challenges. And when we have those stories passed down to us, especially from a younger generation perspective, we can see that although times are tough now, we can get through this. And so it's really interesting how just exposure to a different generation can give us examples of what resiliency looks like. And I feel like because our society today is so isolated and based on individualism, that
Mm-hmm.
often we don't tap into that superpower or that amazing resource of the older generation to be able to learn about what resiliency was through the life experiences that they've been through. I'm not sure if you kind of
Mhm.
think about the same thing.
Oh, I do. My grandma is 93 years old and she is constantly telling stories. And what I love about the way that she tells stories is she's not telling them to be like, oh, it was so hard. And she's not sharing the story to try to impress anybody. She's just talking about her life and the way that things used to be. And I think about that all the time, actually. And I think about we their resiliency and what we can learn from them. But I also think about how we make assumptions because we don't have access, which I think is actually a good thing. I think for me personally, I think we have too much access to people now. I think people are sharing too much. And so we're just getting, they share too much, but it's almost like a warped reality too. It's like what they want to show in this little box. And so it gives people a warped idea of what their experiences really are. And so getting to know them, asking questions, spending time with people, learning as much as we can, whether it's an older generation or anybody, I think is really critical to us really seeing things from others' perspectives and learning and growing, whether it's a different culture or, somebody that has had a different career, somebody a different race or different gender, anything like that. I want to hear their stories too.
Building the skill set of curiosity, I feel like is something that a lot of people can do that serves us so well. And in our last
Mhm.
conversation, we talked about the importance of soft skills, especially in leadership today: empathy, compassion, kind candor, curiosity, tenacity. So I want you to kind of talk about why soft skills are important, especially in leadership, and some of the initiatives that you're currently taking on to kind of push us in that path of developing those soft skills for our leaders of the future generations.
Yeah, soft skills I think are absolutely critical for leaders to be successful in at least U.S. organizations and international organizations. I think that we're going more remote. We are, you and I, we've never met. We're talking and we're getting to know each other, but we've never met face to face, and so we don't necessarily have the ability that we had in the past to build relationships and build shared experiences that we've had previously. So how do you still build that connection? How do you keep people engaged? How do you inspire them? How do you help them grow in their careers and reach your eventual mission? You do that through really developing your soft skills. So that's active listening, even if it's virtual. That's empathy, that's kindness, like you said, a kind candor, being firm, direct, but still compassionate. And it's rethinking some of the practices that have been really standard for a long time, like open door policy. How do I have an open door policy if I never see people face to face? How can I use soft skills to make them understand that I am accessible and I will take the time to listen to them and get them comfortable so that we can continue to be productive and reach our goals. And so those are questions I think a lot of the really forward thinking leaders and HR leaders are asking and kind of working together to develop some strategies. And one of the things that we're doing at my organization is creating an international leadership training that it will include people that are new to leadership all the way up to our senior level team. We really want that cross collaboration. That is a year-long program, and the first 6 months is on self-development on those soft skills. So looking at that seriously effective communication and asking the questions like I just asked, challenging them. How do you have an open door policy? How can you create psychological safety if you're only seeing people through a computer? Um, and really digging into emotional intelligence. And then once we've built that out, then we're going to shift to some more team building. Um, some of the places that I've worked in the past, I've gotten a lot of pushback. People still think soft skills are not necessary. People will still say no. Like I said earlier, they'll say like, we don't need to give them a cookie just for showing up to work. They should be doing their job. And so part of the initiative or part of the work that I'm doing is showing those people the return on the effort, the return on results that you get, or return on investment, I'm sorry, that you get when you do build out soft skills, when you do take the time to treat people with respect and you treat them as individuals and help explain the why to them, how you do produce results where you're more productive, you have less turnover, people are more engaged. And when I work with them that way and show them the return on investment and show them the actual measurables, you slowly get people to buy in. it takes time, it takes a lot of patience, and but we eventually get there, and I think we end up being much better for it. We have cultures that are psychologically safe. We have employees that are really thriving and happy to be where they are.
Yeah, a message that I would have for all of our old school leaders who don't think that the soft skills are important. I like to put it through the lens of future proofing your organization. When we
Yeah,
think about how we can continue to future proof the success of our organization, we have to be able to develop these soft skills to be able to meet this incoming generation who is more aware of these emotional intelligence elements and why they're important to their work culture. But I mean, it can't be easy to kind of have to persuade and influence older generations of people who have said, I've done this for 30 years and I've gotten results. And it's just
right.
an interesting time to look at business on the other side of the pandemic as a completely new landscape. What worked there is not going to work here, and what got us here is not going to get us there. It's just a really interesting dichotomy for an HR leader like yourself to be in, to be able to have to say, I need to persuade not only the C suite, but also everybody who's coming into the organization to embody and I would say envelop these type of characteristics.
Exactly, and be very intentional with it and understand that things take time and take budget. And so you can't just change something overnight just because you know that's what's right. So it's just like any initiative that you have within an organization. If you're bringing in new technology or if you have a new goal or strategy for 5 years, it's the same thing with HR strategies. You have to be really intentional and you have to learn to be an influential leader. You have to learn to speak up and challenge people respectfully, have those conversations offline where you're answering those hard questions. And so it is a little bit of a game almost, it's a little bit of a dance of helping people slowly get there rather than trying to shift their 30-year beliefs overnight.
Yeah, I mean, in our last conversation, you said, I'm a big proponent of playing the game. And one of
I
the things that I
am.
notice, in order for HR to have a seat at the table in the future, we have to be able to play the game of business. As I speak to different HR leaders, they talk about one of the biggest disadvantages HR had was not being able to speak the business language. And while you
Mm.
were talking about business strategy there, I want you to kind of emphasize the importance of being able to say, okay, as an HR and people culture leader, I need to understand the marketing strategy, what the ops strategy looks like, the product strategy, so I can then get behind you guys to be able to support you with the people and culture of the organization and why that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that understanding the big picture strategy, so the overall organizational strategy, and then looking at the key players. So whatever the senior leadership team or even like sub leadership team looks like, and understanding the people that make the decisions and what motivates them. So most people, even though we are looking at that big picture strategy, most department heads or senior leaders, yes, they play for that first team, but they're also looking at their specific department and how they can keep their specific department or their specific priorities moving. And so understanding that, taking the time to ask them questions to understand what they're working on, what their priorities are, and how you can help them will help them get on board with you. Like, okay, so if you think about the communications team, like you said, marketing, and if they have a 5 year strategy, if they want to roll out these specific things, you can sit down with them as HR and be like, okay, how can we help you? What kind of staffing do you need? What kind of training do you need? What types of consultants might we need to bring in? All of those different types of questions so that they understand how important what you're doing is for them. And by learning the business, understanding the budget, understanding if you're a nonprofit, understanding what the board is driving, you can play the game. You can shift the language in every conversation that you're having, every presentation that you give, so that you're talking about that bottom line, or you're talking about whatever that end goal is. You say, by hiring these 5 people, we're going to help you reach this goal. You reach this goal, and ultimately, we'll be able to reach our overall mission. So it is a strategic game for sure. It doesn't mean you're brown nosing. I mean, I've had conversations with people where they're like, I just don't believe in brown nosing. That's not what it is at all. It's like you're not brown nosing if you're playing a game of chess, right? You're playing to to get to the end, or if you're playing Monopoly or whatever it is, you're playing to win. It's the same thing. You're not brown nosing. You're just smart enough to understand what motivates the key players, and you're helping deliver that.
I feel like a big part of being able to accomplish our mission today, no matter what type of organization you're a part of, is embracing technology. And I know
Absolutely.
that the conversation around AI is a big conversation. So, how do you kind of, as a people and culture leader, position tools and technology like AI so you can help your organization kind of accomplish your mission? Like, what does AI mean to you on the landscape of business these days?
Yeah, for me in particular, I think that HR and IT go hand in hand, and I think that anybody in HR should recognize that and get very comfortable and familiar with whomever does IT for their organization, because a lot of technology and people practices should be overlapping. So I've had a lot of discussions with our head of IT and talked through. I mean, I have a couple of answers to your question. I mean, there's like the legal ramifications of using AI and making sure you're not putting proprietary information into anything that you might be using, and also ensuring that any research, that if ChatGPT gives you a solution, that you're researching it and you're not just assuming that it's law. So there's that piece that I think is very important, regulating it and making sure that people understand how to use it. But in terms of how much it can help us, I think it's absolutely incredible. And when I think about some of the things that we're trying to do at our organization, with helping some of the country offices that we're in develop some of their HR strategies or people related training strategies, the fact that we can go into a tool like ChatGPT or some of the other really great tools that there are and type in questions and have a conversation that reduces maybe what it would have been 3 days of work, and now I'm down to 2 hours of work, and then I can have a meeting and then go back. It is a mind blowing, and I think I would recommend that people get on board and learn about it and start using it, maybe in a very small way to help them gain some comfort with it. But they should start using it because it's a game changer, and I'm really excited to see what the shift can be. The second part of my answer is I know people have some fear of AI. They're afraid that it's going to take jobs. But I think organizations that start thinking about it now and thinking about how to integrate it into existing strategies will be able to use it just the way that we're using it rather than worry about it eliminating jobs, and think of it as a way that it's just helping us step up into areas that we maybe never even considered before.
Yeah, the way in which we love to position technology is it's not a replacement, but an accelerator. One of the things that
Exactly.
we do in our business that we've been asked by a lot of our partners is how do you help us reduce redundant tasks? From an HR perspective specifically, we work with organizations, healthcare systems to have them leverage conversational AI via text messages so their team can ask questions about policies and procedures,
Yes.
compliance, the PTO, FMLA, all these other things that tied up our human capital resources by answering phone calls, going back and forth with people. Those type of tasks don't need to be leveraged in the same way that we once did, because
Right.
that type of redundancy creates inefficiencies. But if we can put humans in the human seat to be able to respond to human centric, I would say, needs and tasks, then we can help organizations be more effective. And so that's how technology is supposed to be an accelerator, not a
Yeah.
replacement. And I just love the curiosity that comes along with that mindset of saying, how do these tools work for us? How can we integrate them so we can be more effective at doing our jobs? It's just such a game
I
changer.
love that. I love that. And I think I love the way that you worded that. And I can't wait till this episode comes out so I can share it with some people that have challenged me because I think you worded it really nicely. And I think helping people that are a little bit fearful or even more than a little bit fearful understand that they've actually been using AI technology for a long time. They just don't know it. So if you think about things like when you're emailing and it auto predicts for you, or you think about things like spell check or anything like that, that you've already been using this. This is just an expansion to help you be more efficient and help you do the pieces of your job that are human centric or take more energy, like building the relationships, like we talked about before, building that psychological safety and things like that. I can shift my focus to my people rather than spending so much time typing up something that AI could do for me in 5 minutes.
Yeah, because people and culture is not nurtured and created by you sending back and forth emails. Do you know
You're
what I mean?
right.
It's like it's the
Exactly.
human connection that we can leverage that helps build that people and culture that we're trying to
Exactly.
accomplish in our organizations today, which is so cool.
Yeah.
So, one of the last things that I kind of want to hit on for our topics of discussion today is the future of HR, people, and culture from your perspective. What are some of the challenges that we're currently facing? in getting to the future, I would say, utopia of people and culture? And what type of things do we need to be aware of in the future as we kind of navigate the next like 5 years in your perspective?
Well, you touched on the first one, which is AI. I think it's a challenge. I think it's a great opportunity, but it is a challenge. And I think organizations need to be proactive in figuring out what they're going to allow and how they're going to best utilize AI as it continues to progress. I think you touched on it at the very beginning. The fear-based culture that we see, at least in the U.S. and maybe Western civilization, that the fear-based culture and access to information, but not necessarily all of the information, is something that can be very dangerous. And so, being proactive is probably the solution to a lot of things, where HR and senior leadership need to understand how much access people have, how smart people are in many ways, but how they also act off of a little information, and try to be proactive in creating environments, creating policies and procedures, creating technology or using technology that already exists to help circumvent that. Um, Interestingly, I know, I mean, AI I think makes sense, but that piece maybe doesn't seem like something that's such a big issue, but it really is. It takes up so much of our time, is dealing with fear or misinformation. And I think many of the places that I've worked, at least in the past maybe 10 years, places that I've worked or different groups that I've worked with, I see a lot of organizations kind of trying to build the third floor when they haven't built the foundation yet, if that makes sense. And so people are trying to move so quickly that they're forgetting some of the foundational things that really make an organization solid and help people feel like the work that they're doing is worthy of the mission and the vision and is giving them the safety that they need as individuals and as a group. So while we're speeding up, I think we also need to slow down and make sure that we're considering all of those pieces.
Yeah, I mean, the fastest way to build a 10-story building is not the fastest way to build a 100-story building. And if you want to build a
Exactly.
100-story building, you have to build the foundation that is going to stand the test of time. And I feel like as we're
Absolutely.
building and future proofing our organizations, we have to be really tactful in thinking about how we put down the bedrock, the foundation, level one, level two, level three. Those things will take time. But if we're trying to be sustainable for the future, we have to be more tactful and intentional. I loved how you used that word earlier, to be able to think about what the future of our organizations look like.
Yeah,
So, an amazing
absolutely.
time, but so much opportunity in front of us as well.
Yeah, definitely. I agree completely.
So, Mickey, I want to give you the opportunity to pose a question for our
Great.
next guest. What do you got for us?
Great. I wrote it down. So I am all about bringing play and fun into an organization. For me, I think it's critical. So I would love to learn from the next guest how important they think fun and play are in a workplace, and what impact have they seen in being intentional with making play and fun part of the workplace culture.
I think that's an amazing question. I'm looking forward to hearing the next answer from the guest. It's going to be
Yeah.
really cool to hear that answer.
Awesome.
Well, Mickey, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the HR Heroes podcast. It was such an opportunity for me to highlight you as an HR hero who's pushing forward the people and culture of your organization with such an amazing mission to end poverty in our communities and across the world. It's just so cool to hear the story and the mindset of someone who is being so intentional about why these things are important for the sustainability of our businesses and our communities. And I just want to say, for everybody watching and listening, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Keaton. It was really fun. I really appreciate you having me. I can't wait to see this episode and also watch your other episodes. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, guys, that's another episode of the HR Heroes podcast. That's a wrap.